And so it is. Okay, we are on. Well, what do we do? One never knows. But I think it would be safe to say that I am Terry Roberts, and I am here to engage you in dialogue about a lot of things, not the least of which is that group some of you know about as the Little Rock Nine. What you probably don't know is each one of those 9 members, and we'll get to that. I have on this PowerPoint. By the way, I did it myself, although my grandsons would judge me probably a C-. I tell you why. Some years ago I was doing a PowerPoint for a presentation and my then 8-year-old grandson ran up behind me. He says, "Papa, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing a PowerPoint." And he zoomed down the road. He just disappeared. Whoa, where'd he go? Well, he comes back minutes later and he says, "Scoot over, Papa. I want to show you the PowerPoint I did in 1st grade. And then he played that one and he said, "Let me show you the one I did in 2nd grade. And by that time I said to him, "You know what, PJ, do not get up. Just continue working on the one that I was working on because obviously you have more skill than I do." And that was true. I gave him credit. I put his name on that one. That kid was good. He still is. He's 14 now. He's 6'6". I just got a message from my friend. I told her, sent her a picture of PJ. He's 14 and still growing. She says, "Forget the college fund. You got to start a shoe fund for that kid." Life wasn't like that for me, though. I came on the scene in 1941, and life was very different. That's my year, 1941. It's at the end of that particular timeline. We're going to go through the whole timeline, but we started in 1941, then we'll go back in time. What happened in 1941? Well, as I said, Terry Roberts burst on the scene. I came charging out of the womb, just slipped right down the vaginal canal. Zoop! There I am. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't hurt in the process. I wound up with a totally cool body. Anyway, but I didn't know much. See, like you, I came into the universe with a storehouse of ignorance, and it's designed that way. You can't learn much while you're just squishing around there in the womb. But then later, you can. You pick up power of speech, you learn how to use your brain, all that stuff. But none of this had happened yet. My quest as a very young kid was simply to find a meal. I was always hungry. Anyway, that all happened. But the one thing that stands out, given all of that crazy stuff, is the message I received upon exiting was harsh. Really harsh. The message was, "Terry Roberts, you are in trouble. You have entered our society clothed in black skin, and did you not know, had no one told you, that black skin is not the proper covering for a real human?" That was the question. Now, that could only be possible in a society that had dedicated itself to racial discrimination and the ideology of racism. That was only possible. But that message was not unusual, as it turns out. Because by law and by custom, and by law, we go back to the second date on the timeline, that's 1896. Does that ring any bells for anybody? Those of you who are history majors, those of you who were not asleep in history class, okay? 1896, that's the Plessy versus Ferguson decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, rendered in 1896 with the dictum of separate but equal, which you may have heard about. Separate but equal was the law of the land when I was born. So, when I walked out of the woman 41, well, I didn't walk, but anyway, I came out, and there was this law. But not only was the law in place, it was customary to discriminate against people like me, and it was legal, constitutional, all that stuff. See, these are pretty formidable barriers to my being completely able to operate in society as a respected and honored human being. That's not the kind of start you need, folks, honestly. It's not the kind of start I needed or wanted, but there it was. Now, the 1896 decision didn't start anything. That's why we go back to the next number on the timeline, 1619. You see, that's the date that the very first shipload of Africans were transported here to begin this process of free labor. Now, that whole process morphed into the establishment of the institution of slavery a few years later in 1619. But once it got moving, it was in full force. And it lasted a very long time. In fact, it lasted until 1954. Now, think about this. Going back to slide number 2, from 1619 to 1954, it was legal, constitutional, to discriminate based on racial group membership. How many years between 1619 and 1954? Anybody know offhand? What's this school name? The name of the school? Prairie? Anybody here at Prairie know how to do subtraction? Okay, here's how you do it. Anybody got the number yet? You take 1954 and put it on the top line, and it's 1619. Okay, there we go. Okay. That's good, because I was going to get into trouble with that process anyway. 335 years. Now, here's the deal. Think about this. If you do something for 335 years, I don't know, practice a yo-yo, riding a bicycle, what happens after 335 years of practice? What happens? You get good at it, right? You are now an Olympian in your chosen sport. 335 years? Oh yeah. You may be too decrepit to compete, but you are good. Now, think about this. In this country, we the people were permitted, authorized, expected to discriminate based on racial group membership for 335 years. Now, what do you think happened to us as a people as a consequence of that? Think about it. That accounts for the chaos we see now in terms of things racial in this country in 2018. See, history is important, folks. Now, a number of us, unfortunately, think that history is outmoded stuff that happened years ago and has no relevance. Never, ever fall for that game. No. Without the historical record, you have no present. The choices you make today, April 5, 2018, will dictate in very large measure the range of options open to you on April 6, 2018. And so it has been forever. What you do today tells you how tomorrow is going to be. So if for 335 years, and the law changed in 54 with the Brown decision, and so that's a significant milestone, but it doesn't mean what you think it means, that everything's over. No, no, no. The law changed, but nothing else changed with it. Things social, cultural, emotional, psychological, ideological, all remained intact. So the law was virtually unimpactful. In fact, when you think about it, and more than that, when you read about it and discover for yourself, this was not a preferred Supreme Court decision. Now, Plessy, on the other hand, was embraced fully, but Brown, oh no. Hundreds of people, thousands maybe, just erupted in protest. Over 100 members of the U.S. Congress pinned their names to a document we know as the Southern Manifesto. And in that manifesto, they said, we will do whatever we can do, whatever is within our power to prevent implementation of this dreaded Brown decision. You see, once you have invested in discriminating for 335 years, you don't want to give it up simply because the law changes. Oh no. And again, to make the reference, you can see the consequence now in 2018. It's there. I mean, no sense beating around the bush. It's right there in front of us. Even though, for some people, there's a great deal of denial, and we may get into that during our discussion. But in point of fact, there I was as a 13-year-old kid in 1954, wondering, what does this really mean? Am I truly protected by law now? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see what happens. Well, what happened was this. Chaos in Little Rock. Sounds ominous, right? Well, I tell you, it was one hellish moment. What happened here in 1954 with the passage of the, or not the passage of, but the decree by the Supreme Court? The Little Rock School District decided, simply based on the fact that certain people had been elected to the board. Now, this is a historical artifact, and you'll see these things popping up historically all over the place. Sometimes, just because of the confluence of events, you will find a group of people who are ready and willing to buck the system, to make decisions that differ from the regular 335-year program. They decided, we're going to take this decision and run with it. We're going to desegregate schools. Now, they weren't totally naive, but they were not as aware about the intensity of the opposition they might face. So they went boldly forward, thinking this might work. You're right. Immediately, though, they were met with strong opposition. In fact, their very first plan was thrown out. They wanted to desegregate kindergarten through 3rd grade. Now think about it. In this community, if you wanted to desegregate a school and you wanted to start at kindergarten through 3rd grade, would you anticipate real problems? Maybe not. Although, well, you never know. It's Iowa after all. Anyway, most likely though, it would have happened. Because you hardly ever pick up the Iowa International Times with the headline, "Race Riot in Kindergarten." Yeah, not likely. People of Little Rock knew this, and they were unhappy, and they said to the school board, "You can't do this to us. That impacts our cherished way of life. We're not giving that up. We still want to discriminate." But the school board backed down. They came back with Plan B, grades 10, 11, and 12. The opposition, while not completely mollified, said, okay, we'll accept that. Inside themselves, they reasoned, well, these kids at grades 10, 11, and 12, they've been so steeped in the ideology of racism, they will not allow this to continue. And they were right. And we, the 9, caught hell as a consequence. Well, my thinking, my individual personal thinking about all of this was, I could be killed. What was I thinking? And yet, because of my knowledge of the fact that thousands of people who lived before me had given their lives to make it possible for me to be there in the first place, I said, okay, I'm going. I'm going to go for it. And so it was. And here we are, the Little Rock 9. What I'm going to do now is introduce you to the entire group, because often you hear about this group as a rather amorphous group, subsumed under this rubric of Little Rock 9, but there are actually 9 different people with 9 different personalities. And all of us, though, are trying to find hope in this midst of chaos. It has been a very difficult thing in this country, for people of color especially. How do you find hope when all the odds seem to be totally stacked against you? It's a hard way of life. At any rate, here we are. And as you look at that photo, you actually count 10 people, not 9. Well, the person standing on your right, second in, that's Daisy Bates. She's the president of the Arkansas State chapter of the NAACP. She and her husband, L.C. Bates, were particularly important in our lives because they ran a newspaper, the State Press, which had been actively pushing for justice and equality and human rights for decades, even before I was born. And there they were, still on the scene and helping out. But there we are, 9 different people, and we're going to go through each one of these folk, starting with Ernie Green. Some of you may have seen his story in a movie entitled The Ernie Green Story, a Disney production. Disney, by the way, is very cheap. I was a consultant, and they only paid me $100. Can you believe that? I almost sent a check back. I didn't. But Ernie worked for President Carter. He was in Carter's cabinet in the Labor Department. He also then worked for Lehman Brothers. Had the misfortune of being there when they didn't get bailed out from that economic debacle we all faced a few years ago. Unfortunately, for some reason. You guys see okay with this thing in a way? Okay. Because you can move it if you can. Okay. Okay, no. That's the way it is in high school. Stuff gets in the way. All right. And here we go. Carlotta, 14 years old. She was the youngest of our group, 10th grade. Carlotta has written a book that's up there, Mighty Long Way. By the way, several of us have written books, as you'll see. I recommend that you buy all these books, especially mine. Well, because, you know, the publisher said whenever you're out in public, be sure to peddle your book. Who am I to argue with the publisher? So, at any rate, Carlotta, wonderful young woman, very athletic, very agile. She told me a story about this young white kid who used to walk behind her, stepping on her heels, just causing her all kinds of difficulties and chafed heels. And she said, okay, one day she decided, I'm going to make her work for it. So she walked really fast, and this kid had to catch up. It was good for her, though. She got a little exercise, which she probably needed. Now, Jeff is the only one of us who's no longer around. Jeff was a 10th grader. He had the very unfortunate experience of having to leave Little Rock and then later in life wound up in the jungles of Vietnam. Tragic stuff, tragic stuff. But you know, it just gives rise to all kinds of stuff that goes on in this country. Wars and rumors of wars, etc. Jeff had to encounter this defoliant, Agent Orange and other things. He died a very untimely death as a young man. Elizabeth, all of you have probably seen that photo on the bottom right. That's Elizabeth on day one. And Hazel is behind her with her mouth open, as wide as she can make it, spewing out racist invective. And then on the left, you see a different photo. There's Hazel and Elizabeth reconciling. Why? Because as an adult, Hazel gave up her belief in racist ideology. She explained to her parents that she was doing that, and they kicked her out. She is persona non grata at home, which is, again, sort of a micro story of what happens when you decide to come to your senses. You may so tick off your loved ones, they don't want to have anything more to do with you because they value the racist ideology more than they value the daughter. Anyway, but Elizabeth, I guess the one thing to say about her is on the bottom. She was the most traumatized of the 9, and that's a tragic kind of thing. Ah, there we go. The heart of the matter. Terrance Roberts. Yes, sir.
The one on the top that said, in the wrong place, the wrong time.
Oh, that means that when you are at a place where people want to kill you, it's obviously you're in the wrong place. And if your timing had been better, maybe not, right? Yes. So, if you'll notice that photo on the right, that's one of my favorite photos from the historical record, by the way. That's me facing Arkansas State National Guardsmen. And these guys, they didn't say anything, but they look mean and menacing, and they are. I mean, obviously, look on their faces. You think you're getting in here, boy? Are you crazy? Well, anyway, and there I am wondering about their mental health. And here are the books. I'll leave this up for a while so we can copy down titles. And then there's another photo of me on the right. Okay, so, Minnie Jean Brown Trickey. 10th grade, no, 11th grade, pardon me. There were 5 of us in the 11th grade. Minnie was in the 11th grade. She was the only one of us who didn't last through the entire year. We had all made a vow of nonviolence. We'd taken a vow of nonviolence. We weren't going to fight back. And that was difficult. Difficult to the extreme because the kids at Central didn't understand the nuances of nonviolence. They simply saw us as stationary targets. And they took great liberty. Minnie Jean, one day in the cafeteria, had gotten her lunch tray and was calmly walking to her seat, but some kid at a table pushed back and impeded her progress, and she stood over him with a tray just sort of hovering there and contemplating a simple question: should I or should I not share my lunch with this kid? Well, it took her a while, but she decided in the affirmative, and she upended that tray of food on him. Covered it. The historians call it the chili incident, but Minnie Jean herself would tell you it was not just the chili, it was the chili and the jello, the salad, the roll, the milk, everything. Now, the next day, somebody returned the favor, and they covered her with food, at which point Minnie Jean said, okay, that's it, I'm giving up nonviolence. These kids don't seem to understand nonviolence. They need to speak to me in languages that we both understand, so I'm going to speak violence. They seem to be attracted to violence. I'll be violent too. So she started beating up white kids with some regularity. At that point, the school officials said, okay, we're going to kick you out of school now. And she said, why? She said, well, for your own safety and well-being, they said. Well, she knew that was a lie. We all knew that was a lie. They were kicking her out because she was now beating up all these white kids. That's always a thing. Now, in the wake of Minnie Jean's expulsion, little cards were circulated all over that campus. 1 down, 8 to go. And so they tried mightily to get rid of all of us. We, the remaining 8, simply recommitted ourselves to principles of nonviolence. And it's not hard. It's easy to say it as I stand here, but it wasn't easy, folks. It was very difficult because it's hard to manage your life when you keep getting beaten up. It interferes with your learning process. That's right. So, Melba Beals, just coincidentally, I turned on the TV last night. I was in a hotel, and there was Melba on TV. Yeah, she was on an MSNBC program along with some other civil rights activists, and they were discussing issues of today. It wasn't the best possible TV you could imagine, but it was good because Melba enjoys being on TV. In fact, in my book, I describe her as being a diva. Melba was so cool. She knows a lot of words. I saw her one day in the halls at Central calling a guy a crustacean. He was so taken aback, he didn't know what he was being called. She got away and got into violence. And then Thelma Mothershed Weir. Remarkable story. She was also a high school junior that year, but she had been born with a bad heart. She was called, at the language of the times, a blue baby. That is, her skin tone was blue because the heart was not operating properly. But she managed to defy the odds, and she was not expected to live beyond a few years. But not only did she continue to live and is still alive, but she chose to go to Central High School as one of our group of 9. We all worried about her because we thought something was going to happen to lead her to an early death. But she managed to survive and then trained to be a high school teacher, wound up teaching in East St. Louis, Illinois. And if you know anything about that region, you know she did go from the frying pan into the fire. East St. Louis is not the easiest of places to exist, let alone teach. Gloria, wonderful young woman, 10th grade student in 1957. She had very mixed feelings about what happened there in Little Rock. She wound up leaving the country. She's been living in Sweden since very early in the 60s. She was at one point the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Computers and Industry. Very smart. She disputes what I have to say about her in my profile. I do a profile of all the other 8 in my book. She's the only one who thinks I got it wrong. But she's wrong, I actually got it right. Okay. Now, there's another picture of Daisy Bates, and then in the middle, Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas. This guy, I don't know how to describe him. He's like so many other politicians. Long after this event, I was on a program with him on TV. We were on Good Morning America. On the show, I accused him of putting us in danger. I said, look, what you did could have cost us our lives. What were you thinking? He said, well, I had to do that. Otherwise, I would not have been reelected. He's a politician to the end. On the right is President Eisenhower, who sometimes unfairly gets labeled as an advocate for civil rights. He was not. He did, however, send the troops in, and we benefited. And so, without the presence of the U.S. troops, the 101st Airborne Division, I don't think we would have been alive today. Direct cause. Other players, Martin Luther King Jr. Yesterday we celebrated, not celebrated I guess, but recognized the 50-year anniversary of his assassination. Poignant, very poignant. Moreover, than anything else, he was misunderstood in this country to a great degree. A few years ago, for instance, I was hired by the Department of Education in the state of Kentucky to review social studies textbooks. I picked up one and opened it on the chapter having to do with Dr. King, and the first sentence in that chapter was this, and I quote, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a great leader for black people. At which point I closed the book. I didn't have to read anymore. Just that one sentence told me this was not properly written. I said to the superintendent, this has to be rewritten. You can't use this. And she was a little dumbfounded. It's important to know that Dr. King's main message went far beyond civil rights, human rights. It was about this country's soul. We are a diseased country. Think about this, 335 years of diseased roots. You can't help but be diseased when you have that sort of ideology at base. These two men on the right, Thurgood Marshall and Wiley Branton, were our attorneys. Thurgood went on to become a Supreme Court justice. Wiley, unfortunately, died an early death. Interestingly enough, I'll tell you this little anecdote about Thurgood Marshall. He and I and others were at the funeral for Wiley. I sat next to Justice Marshall, and he said to me, Terry, I don't want to die the way Wiley died. He died peaceful in his sleep. No, that's not the way I want to go out. Well, I said, Justice Marshall, how do you want to go out? He says, well, I want to be shot in church by a jealous lover. Now, here we are, going up the steps of Central High School. This is escorted to school by the 101st Airborne Division. I love this photo. See, because my default option, once the 101st showed up, if something goes bad, I'll jump behind these soldiers and they will mow people down on my behalf. Take it out. Get rid of them. I said that once, though, to a middle school group, and a kid raised his hand. He says, Dr. Robbins, just seconds ago you told us you were nonviolent. Here you are advocating violence. He says, well, kid, I told him I'm still nonviolent, but the soldiers, no, they're violent. See, the deal is sometimes if you choose nonviolence, you need to have some allies with guns. I myself, I am truly not 100% nonviolent. I am 99.9% nonviolent. Yeah, that 1% will get you killed though, so be careful. Now, here, these next few photos shows you some of the scenes that we had to deal with on a daily basis. And this kid on the left represents a number of kids who left school when we showed up. They made the choice to leave school rather than be in school with us, saying that they would never, ever go to school with Negroes. Isn't that cool? Negroes. I used to be a Negro. Okay. Here we have people hanging other people in effigy, and more people who won't go to school with Negroes. Very interesting. Race mixing is communism. You know, I always think when I look at this one, even though they're flying the American flag, if they really understand race mixing or communism, I don't know. It's hard to tell by the faces. And the Confederate flag is thrown in most of all the time. Stop immigration, immigration is communism, etc., etc. That's our history. That's our history. And that's confusing a lot of people even today. And here we go. I love this one. There we are on the left. We're leaving school as a group. You see, we were not allowed to participate in anything extracurricular. We were locked out of sports, and choral, and music, and field trips, and school plays, and anything that had to do with, other than classwork, we were aged out. We actually had to sign an affidavit. We would not be involved in extracurricular activities. And then juxtapose that to this group on the right. Governor Faubus. It's as if they're saying, let's make America Christian again. Okay. And here we go. Another one, opposition on, see how they're standing up there? And here we come with our guards. Without the guards, you see, they would have been all over us. Wow. This one, Alex Wilson. Some of you may have read about his story. Newsman from Memphis, tri-state defender. He's there to report on the story. He gets singled out by the mob and beaten savagely. Just beaten. But he, former veteran, World War II vet, he feels dishonored by all of this. He refuses to run. Each time they knock him down, he stands up, dusts himself off, puts his hat back on, and then 2 steps later gets knocked down again. This just goes on for blocks. Until finally some guy walks up behind him with a brick and nails him on the head and takes him down for the last time. He didn't die that day, but he died shortly thereafter as a consequence. And I'm not sure what this is all about, but this I think is instructive because that scripture from 2 Peter, I'm not sure exactly why I threw that in there, but I think I know. Okay. It's because a lot of the folk who insist that we go back to those times when we had the racial hierarchy and keep that in place is because God has ordained it. You know, God gets responsible or made responsible for a lot of nonsense. Even that stuff you heard in 4th and 5th grade called Manifest Destiny. Some of you may remember that. Manifest Destiny was that concept that God ordained the European settlers to come over here and occupy this land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And we could do it even though people were here. They'll just kill them off, no problem. There's that card I talked about, 1 down, 8 to go. And then, this is the, back to the Congressional Gold Medal, awarded by former President Bill Clinton. He insisted that he be involved because he was from Arkansas. And that was all right. You know. These sculptures, these are life-size statues of the little... And whoever is governor of Arkansas, whoever he or she is, looking out of the window, first thing they see is the statues of the little Montana. And then finally, this is our last photo, our last slide. No more PowerPoint. Okay. 60 years later, this was taken in September past. It's 2017. Let's continue to look at that. Not quite this thing. We're going to have our discussion. This is the main part of my being here anyway, to have dialogue with you guys. So Questions, comments, confessions, whatever? Yes, here we go. Stand right up. People stand up. Here's the idea. What are we drinking? We're drinking a bottle of water. Hey, don't mind me that you're not. Okay. All right. Yes. No. It would be exactly your size. Yes.
Do you stay in touch with the other people all the time?
Of the 9 of us?
Yeah.
Yes. Her question is, do I stay in touch with the other members of the group? All 8 of us who remain are members of the Little Rock 9 Foundation. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you, the next time you're in front of a screen, which won't be too long if I know you're busy, look for the Little Rock 9 Foundation, www.littlerock9.com. Look diligently for the little button labeled Contribution. Click on that button and follow the instructions. And then we will rob you of all of your hard-earned money and turn it into scholarship assistance for kids around the world. Now, in fact, I'm saving you, because some of you will waste that money on burritos, which, by the way, is not really food. Or chocolate. Okay.
Or cafe drinks from Starbucks.
Yes, bring it back.
Did you ever think about giving up? Like, did you ever think that you weren't going to get anywhere?
Her question, did I ever think about giving up? The answer is a resounding yes! I thought about giving up every second of every day. You see what happens if I come this way, if I can do some of that echo stuff. Hey, maybe so. Alrighty. So yeah, thank you for that question. I did want to quit, seriously. It wasn't easy to get beaten up every day. And you wonder sometimes, along the way, if it's really worth it, but to keep coming back. Something inside you said, I must go back each day, so I did. And that's something that you can think about as young people. Do you have a notion about who you are and what you stand for? Do you have that notion in answer? Rhetorical, just to answer. But really contemplate that question. Faced with a dilemma that puts your life on the line, what would you do? That's always a very serious question. And today, perhaps more than any other time in our history, since so much confusion is going on in this country. Okay, who's next? Here we are. You said home. Could you explain to me how you said home?
It's a pause statement, so I can think about
Okay, let's do this one. Let's not pause, let's just do it.
Okay.
Go to high school after that building closed down. I left Little Rock. I took up an invitation from relatives who lived in Los Angeles, California. Moved out there in August of '58 and enrolled in Los Angeles High School. In fact, I encouraged and persuaded my entire family to join me, so by December of '58, we had all moved. We gave up our Little Rock visa and never ever reinstated it. In fact, if you've never been to Little Rock, I wouldn't suggest you go racing down there, because once you've been away from there for about 2 weeks, there's no reason to go back anyway. But if you seriously want to go, the high school is a national park. It's the only operational high school that is also a national park. So maybe worth your time and effort. Thank you. Okay, right here. You also say, it's an afternoon. Okay.
Have you ever become like friends with any of the before they finally understand that you're a person?
Well, the thing is, her question is that I become friends with even white students at Central. My default option, I'm a friend to everybody, a priori. When I walk in the room, whoever's in there is my friend. Now, often, they don't understand that. And often they choose not to be my friend. So, at Central, it was the same. Also, many of the students were adhering to an injunction they'd heard that if they befriended us, they would be killed as well. There was very little incentive then for them to reach out. However, in spite of that, there were a few white students who reached across the line anyway and suffered as a consequence of their choice. And that's another reason I'm saying to you, if somebody enters your society here at Prairie, who seems to be an outcast or without friends, and you choose not to befriend them, you may have missed a golden opportunity. You may have. Maybe not. But think about it. What would you do in that situation? Would you brave the hostility of your fellow students. You see, I grew up with a mom who inoculated me against this concept called peer pressure. She said to all 7 of us, there are 7 siblings in my family, she said to all of us, you will hear this concept of peer pressure when you leave this household. Once you cross the threshold out there in the world, people will try and convince you there's such a thing as peer pressure. Don't believe it for a second, she said. There's no such thing as peer pressure. If you do what other people want you to do, that's just stupid. That's not peer pressure. Absolutely. Okay, waiting over here.
Yeah, I was wondering how you would compare today to when you were back in Little.
Compared today to when I was back in Little Rock?
Yeah.
Very similar. A lot of cosmetic changes, a lot of things on the surface have improved, but underneath, the roots are still diseased. And what that gives rise to is all kinds of crazy stuff. For instance, let's give you one illustration. I'm laughing to myself because often I encounter people who they hear my story and they say, well, surely, Terry Roberts, you're not having to deal with this stuff now. And I say, well, would you like today's story or yesterday's? What would you like to hear? Well, this one actually goes back a few years, not that long. 1985, a few years back. But significant, because it tells you what I have to deal with. My wife and I now live in Pasadena, California. We were living in the Napa Valley, but we made the move to the southern part of the state for employment reasons. My wife had gotten a job at the university, and I said to her, I will follow you because you followed me for all these years. So we determined we would choose Pasadena because it was equidistant between our 2 places of employment. We decided at some point we would buy a home, but because we were unaccustomed to the area, we had not lived there before, we would take our time. So we moved into a condo. That was in 1985. And 3 years later, we were able to move because we had also raised more capital because the cost of living in Southern California was much different. So now we had money, and we went out and we hired a real estate agent, it's 1988, to look for a home. And she was good, I mean, bright, bubbly, vivacious young woman, seemed to know her craft of real estate. And we saw home after home after home. But as it turned out, during this time of home seeking, we also were running around in our own car, becoming acquainted with the neighborhood, and it suddenly struck us that all of the homes we were seeing were clustered in one area of Pasadena. So we had a conference, the 2 of us, and we said, well, maybe her portfolio is limited, she's young after all. So we fired her, and we hired another one. The second real estate agent began to show us home after home after home, but guess what? Those were the same homes, same area. Now lights came on. Something is afoot here. So we fired the second one. We then went out on our own. We just drove around, saw this really nice house, not in that same area. Signed in the yard for sale. We had the agent's name and number. We called, we made an appointment. Wednesday, 10 o'clock. We'll be there. Wednesday, 9:55. We show up. Coming down the stairs from the 2nd floor is a real estate agent who looks excited because she's anticipating at 10 o'clock. She's got a big smile on the clipboard, and then she sees us, Terry Roberts and his wife. Smile disappears, replaced by a frown. She pivots, clutches that clipboard to her chest, and runs up the steps in her high-heel shoes. And I say to my wife, that's our 10 o'clock appointment. She says, are you sure? I said, oh yeah, let's follow her. So we did. She was. But luckily, the law was on our side, you see. Years and years ago, it was against the law for black people to own property in this country. But that law changed. But the impact of that original law was still being felt in this instance. By law, we could buy it. And so we did. That was not the end of the saga, however. We move in. Our neighbor comes running over. And before she introduces herself, she says to us, I want you to know I voted for you in the Neighborhood Watch Council meeting. Oh. We thanked her profusely for her loyalty. Then we inquired, what was this vote about? Well, it turns out the neighbors had a symbol to determine if they were going to support our presence in the neighborhood. Because as it turns out, we were the only family of color for blocks around. That's America in 1988. Very interesting. So yeah, stuff is still there. Stuff is still there. Question is, not so much that it's there, I mean, we all know it's there. Question is, what are we going to do with it? See, none of the fictions that you create for yourselves, none of the linguistic fictions, none of the mental gymnastics is going to make this stuff go away. You have to look at it as it is, and it is not a pretty sight. But again, you have to understand, for 335 years, we nurtured this notion of this foundational philosophy, racist ideology, has a powerful impact. I was reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, recently, and he says in that book, among other things, that if you want to be successful in any human enterprise, you have to practice for 10,000 hours. It occurred to me at one point, find out how many 10,000 hour periods are there in 335 years. So I did the math. It was a little more complicated than that subtraction thing I gave you earlier. And I came up with a result of 296. 296 10,000 hour periods in 335 years. And you know what that translates into in mathematical speak? We the people of these United States of America are practiced in the art of discrimination to the 296th power. That is a powerful number. And it gives us something sobering to think about. If that's where we are, then where is the hope? And that's a rhetorical question that you have to deal with. I don't have the answer, but I long to find the answer. Okay, who's next? Who ate food? Don't get stopped. Yes.
I got to go around.
Okay, now what I'm having to do here is definitely control my emotions. Okay, I don't let you smile. He's a candidate for the 1%, I can see that. Okay, where are they? Oh, in the corner. Oh, over there, okay, go ahead. In the white sweater.
So did your, like, I don't know if your dad and mom were together, but so when your parents, did you bring this up to them, or were you just like, you just go and do it? Because what did your parents think about this?
Well, what happened was, when the school board representatives came and posed a question about volunteers, had about 150 volunteers. Actually, the count was off by one. I had both hands up, so I confused people. But it was truly 150. We all went home and explained to our parents what we had done. My parents said in response, "We will support your decision 100%. And if you get up there and it's too hot and you want to quit, we will support your decision 100%. Now, I had the best of all worlds at that point. I could stay or leave without fear of losing their esteem. That was important. Other parents said, absolutely not. So our numbers dwindled down to 10 so fast. We were at Little Rock 10 for a brief moment, but the 10th child's father received a phone call threatening his loss of employment if he didn't pull her out. He pulled her out and lost the job anyway. That didn't work, but then there were 9. So that's how it went ahead. By the way, you're mentioning my parents. I don't know how they were able to make that decision. Because as a parent myself, I would find it extremely difficult. Because I've been there, I know what to expect. And if that were to happen to my daughters, I have 2 daughters, my wife had 2 daughters, I would be homicidal. Oh yeah, you'd have to kill me to prevent me from killing any others. If something happened to one of them. See, I think that's why I remain at 99.9% nonviolent. If I go 100%, then stuff will happen and I won't have a recourse. But I say that 1%. Okay, why am I laughing? Yes.
Looking back to school, I thought of it and not really stood up.
I'm going to get close to you, but I can't hear it.
Looking back to in school, I thought of what happened and you think everything happened the way it did.
This question, looking back, am I proud of what happened and did everything happen the way it should have? I hardly ever think in those terms, actually, being proud of or not proud. And things for me just, life goes on. Whatever life throws at me, I think I need to be ready for it. So rather than look at it as being proud of what you do, my philosophy is take an internal assessment of who I am, who you are, be the best you can be at all times, commit yourself to that, and see what happens. See what life throws at you. And if you are truly involved in being you, you will be ready. I consider myself ready. I was in Boy Scouts as a kid, and the motto, be prepared, meant so much to me. Be prepared for what? Everything. Whatever. Life happens. You know, you have no control over stuff. It happens. It'll just be there in front of you. One of the things I realize, though, too many of us are vulnerable to what I call the external locuses of control. External locus of control, that is allowing other people to determine who you are and what you shall do. We have it embedded in our language. We say things like, she made me angry, or he drives me up the wall, right? None of that's true. Nobody makes you angry or drives you up the wall. We do by choice, whatever we do. It is all by choice. It's important for us to realize as well that when other people are talking, as I am talking here, I am not saying anything that has anything to do with you. I'm saying who I am. I took a job at the Simon Wiesenthal Center to do some work with people from police forces. I do work with officers from the LAPD, the county sheriffs in Los Angeles, the highway patrol, and ICE agents. And I told them at the beginning, I said, when I start doing these programs, your evaluations are going to be way across the board, a continuum. There will be people there who love me and people who hate me. So I'm trying to prepare them in advance. Even though I tried to prepare them, they fell for it anyway. They were upset that my evaluations weren't all positive. I said, how could it possibly be? Because every single person will have an independent perception of me as an individual. Because they haven't yet learned that all I'm doing is saying who I am. See, what other people think about you is none of your business. Not at all. Anyway, we're going to have to go. Elizabeth is on the edge of her chair. And that means we have another stop to make. But I tell you, it's been an honor for me to be here at Prairie. Go forth and do well.